Welcome, everyone. It is really excited to have you all here today. It looks like we have over 200 participants already joining this conversation. So it's very excited to have this conversation with you today. So welcome to this community conversation. It's about ARPA-H and the cancer moonshot. I am Melissa Antman, and my primary role at ARPA-H is the Deputy Director of our Project Accelerator Transition Innovation Office, or PATIO. And the goal of our office is to make sure that we translate scientific and technical breakthroughs into real-world products and services, ensuring that they result in better health outcomes for all Americans. I do have a second role at ARPA-H, which is serving as our Cancer Moonshot Champion. During this hour, we are going to be having a conversation with Dr. Renee Wegrzyn. She is the inaugural director of ARPA-H, and she has been serving in this role since October 2022. During this hour, I encourage you all to communicate with us using the chat function. The instructions are here. We will get to as many of your questions as we can before the hour is up. And we will also be having a couple of poll questions that you will answer using the functions in the Zoom. So welcome, Renee. Before we launch into how ARPA-H functions, let me ask you, since we launched officially 2 years ago, how far has the agency come in its growth?
Thanks, Melissa. I'm so excited to be here and engage with this community. We have really been exploding in terms of the number of programs launched and hiring the team that is here to deliver the solutions that ARPA-H has really been established to pioneer. We have launched over 15 programs at this point, and we even have new program managers starting today. So we're in a good growth trajectory, and I'm excited to share some of what that looks like today.
Thank you. It is such an exciting time. Can you now walk us through how ARPA-H functions?
Absolutely. So our mission at ARPA-H is to accelerate better health outcomes for everyone. When I was sworn in October of 2022, as Melissa mentioned, that was around the same time that President Biden reignited the Moonshot initiative during his presidency to really focus on some of those very difficult objectives that we all need to achieve across cancer. And so our model, while we're not exclusively focused on cancer, certainly can be leveraged to address some of the biggest challenges of cancer. And so what is our model? So some of you have heard us give our mission briefing, but for those that haven't, they're really thinking about the promise of the ARPA model brings us back to an origin story of the first ARPA, which was at DARPA. So DARPA was launched, of course, in response to Sputnik to create an agency that can both create and prevent technological surprise. Many investments later, some wildly successful, some failures, but that was really part of this high risk, high reward calculus that ARPAs do. But we can seed programs that led to things like the internet. That middle picture with the node drawing was the original 4 nodes of the internet called ARPANET. We have autonomous vehicles, stealth technology, and even mRNA vaccines, which the really important groundbreaking work done by NIH to demonstrate that you could use mRNA to encode genes that encode antibodies or antigens. DARPA really had this catalytic function to bring that to GMP and first in humans. And so imagine what an ARPA for health focus, what are these types of investments that we're seeding today that may lead to moonshots like this of tomorrow? On the next slide, when we established the agency, we really had to first start out with, before we even had program managers, we had our mission statement, and we wanted to identify what are then those mission focus areas where we ideate and create these umbrellas of innovation. And so we have 5 mission offices at ARPA-H. Health Science Futures Office really focuses on expanding the art of what's technically possible. These are entirely new platforms for health in the future. What are going to be the transformative investments that 10, 15 years from now really change the state of the science? Scalable Solutions ensures that we will reach every American at scale, either through manufacturing in a cost-effective and accessible way, all the way to delivery of care, even in those most remote settings. Proactive Health helps keep people from becoming patients in the first place. So this is where a lot of our preventative solutions, looking at behavioral health and social health, will fall under this office. And then resilient systems. This is our systems level innovation office, where we're really looking at what are the data systems and what are the platform capabilities that allow us to be more robust and resilient as a healthcare system. Supporting all of these offices is our transition office, where Melissa is our deputy, in the Project Accelerator Transition Innovation Office. Easier said as PATIO. They're really here to support the R&D that's happening in the other mission offices with an eye on translation. So for us, success at ARPA-H using this very unique model that we have is that these solutions make it into the real world one day. And so business plans, thinking of management teams, the regulatory, all in the payer models, all these things are going to be requirements that happen in parallel to our R&D investments to ensure that transition into the real world. At ARPA-H, we're not successful if we're not thinking about transition and getting things out of the agency. Our investments really are transactional. We will not be a forever funder of any project that we are a part of. We're there to de-risk it. And once we've de-risked it at a convincing scale, that convincing scale means we've convinced somebody else to pick up the next tab. And so that's really what we do here as an engine of innovation. And the ideation that you'll see comes from really two places. So one is from within. These are our program managers that bottoms up come to ARPA-H with a big idea in health that they want to solve, sometimes a big idea in addressing cancer. And we give them the resources to launch those programs. But we give them also a sense of urgency in a term limited appointment. We give them 3 years to really run at these really hard problems. And so that sense of urgency to solve those problems, you'll get passed down all the way to the teams that we fund. The other way that we fund projects is through our external partners who propose ideas to us. We call these projects, and they come in through our innovative solutions openings. And these are really open bandwidth. We're disease agnostic, we're technology agnostic, but we want to look for those places that really could represent the next moonshots in health broadly, whether it's a cancer challenge or looking at other aspects of our healthcare ecosystem. And so what you will, in your encounter with ARPA-H, the way that looks is defining a really well-defined problem. We use what's called the Heilmeier questions. We've adopted these from DARPA. In gray are the ones that really came directly from that original ARPA model, but in blue, I'll walk you through some that we've added that are really unique to the ARPA-H model. In a well-defined problem, if you think about it, we have to make sure this is clearly important, it's clearly hard, and that there are clear ways to measure our progress in solving it. And that's what this framework gives us. And so first and foremost, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? You have to explain it in a way that is really accessible to every audience, from an expert audience to a lay audience. And you'll see some of our what if questions a little bit later in this presentation. And then how is it done today? What's the status quo? And then importantly, the third question, what's new in your approach? What's game changing? Our program managers bring these visions of the future but not just a vision, but also, hey, here's actually real emerging technology that's going to help to get us there. And we really want a deep understanding of what that emergent technology is. And then who cares? If we're successful, what difference will it make? Is this impacting patients? Is this impacting healthcare providers? Who in the chain and the journey of a customer is really impacting? And what are those health outcomes that will accelerate? Again, we don't measure our progress on the number of papers that we publish. It's real health outcomes, standard of care that's changed for patients and providers. And we now want to know what the risks are. So what might make this not happen? Is it a regulatory risk? Is it a technology risk? We want to know those up front on day one of the program. So over the course of an effort, we can actively de-risk and give a better chance of aligning for a breakthrough by the end of the project. How long will the program take? How much will it cost, of course? And then what are those midterm exams for success? If we want to change the future of health 10 years from now, how do we know 6 months, 10 months in that we're on the right track? Very important for us at ARPA-H is our return on investment for the American taxpayer is not a financial return on investment necessarily the way a venture capitalist might look at it. We're looking for benefit to the public. And so this is ensuring equitable access, making sure that our solutions are cost effective, and that we really are thinking about that customer, not on the last day of the program, but the first day of the program. Think about your own personal interactions with the healthcare ecosystem. I can say as a patient, that's not always the best interactions. And so how are we thinking about, really creating solutions that our customers enthusiastically want to adopt? That's the type of result that we want at ARPA-H. And then last but not least, making sure that we're getting ahead of how a program might be misperceived or misunderstood, that we're leading on the messaging there, so that won't be a blocker on the back end of this effort. And so what does a journey of a program look like? Once we have a program manager on board, they further formulate their idea. So their job talk is their big idea, but they have a few months to deconflict. So we know that there's fantastic work and a lot of work already happening in the healthcare ecosystem for federal funders. The National Cancer Institute is a great example of very, very important work that's happening that we don't want to be redundant with. And so we have to work very diligently to deconflict. If we really are shooting for those moonshots that are 10, 15 years from now, that should be relatively easy to deconflict the work that we're doing. But we also want to deconflict with what's happening in the private sector. So what is the private marketplace already really addressing deeply? And what are areas that they would fund if somebody would de-risk it up front? If somebody tells a small company, if a venture capitalist tells a small company, come back to me when you've demonstrated X, that's what we want to fund. We want to fund X in those cases and de-risk it. So we put the program manager at work with our resources to solve that and define it, and then they actually bring their program back up to me and an S&T board. So the director of ARPA-H actually is the sole decision maker on what programs go forward. And so if we say yes to a program, what that looks like is then me granting permission to the program manager to pursue that effort, but then providing the budget and the resources for them to then be the decision maker. So a lot of responsibility and risk sits with that program manager as a decision maker to move very quickly and swiftly. We don't make decisions through a study section. It really is brought together. We want subject matter experts to help us understand the very important problems in this case, cancer, but we're able to take on that risk by having a single decision maker. We'll release a solicitation to the community to propose to an effort. We'll have a proposers day so people can hear the vision of that program manager and what it's like to work with an ARPA. So it's important for you to know that we don't issue grants. We issue contracts and cooperative agreements and other transactions. And what that's all jargon and code for is we have a seat at the table. As we go through these projects, we'll hold you accountable for those deliverables because our goal is to get these out into the real world, but we want to be a partner to you and help you succeed. It's very different from a grants approach. And if you're a first-time ARPA recipient of funds, it might be a little uncomfortable at first when your ARPA program manager says, can I come to your lab meeting? I want to hear what's working, but also what's not working. And so we really want you to be open and transparent with us through that process as we then work towards, working through those abstracts, proposals, source selection, and then negotiating and awarding those contracts. And so this whole birthing process for a program somehow nicely matches a 9-month cycle as well. And so the programs that you'll hear about today all had this kind of events beforehand to get us there. And many of them that you'll hear about are actually in that final stage of negotiating those contracts, and we'll have announcing those teams pretty soon. On the next slide, once we award a program and we launch it, what happens is the program manager, because they're trying to solve one of these big problems in health that is represented as a program, they will select multiple teams that each bring a unique solution to the table. So there isn't a predetermined or a prescribed solution. That is not what an ARPA does. We leave that to you and the community that will be funded. And so in the example here in the middle, in this case, the program manager has selected 3 teams to each bring a different solution to the table. The vertical lines are the milestones that have been set forth in the program that they must hit. And you'll see that not every team makes it to the last day. We really are hedging our bets that we start with a pretty broad aperture of solutions that we want to explore that space. But as we move forward and have technical progress, we will be down selecting to the teams that are really aligned for that breakthrough by the end of the program. And that breakthrough can then is de-risked and can transition out to the community. Giving an example of a convincing scale that would reach a transition point. So in the case of one of our programs, not cancer related, but it's called THEA. It's a whole eye transplantation program. A proof of concept for whole eye transplantation, maybe 2 or 3 patients to convince the next funders that this can work. If we're looking to scale screening for multiple cancers across the country, that might be hundreds of thousands of folks that will participate in a prototype for convincing scale. Just to give you an idea, it really is a bespoke process on how we define those moving forward. Okay. On the next slide, what you see that creates is really a flywheel. We have new program managers that come in and they cycle through every 3 years. And they start new programs. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit later about some of the programs we're funding today. But if you hear a talk like this, let's say 5 years from now from ARPA-H, I might not be here. We'll see. I'm also term limited. I have a 4-year base term and a 4-year renewable term. And our program managers have that 3 and 3-year term. So our people will change and our projects will change. And this is a feature, not a bug. It allows us to sort of sample the ecosystem for health and really de-risk places that are really ripe for innovation in a way that only an ARPA can pursue. And just to convince you on the next slide that we haven't just been sitting on our laurels since we started this agency. We have been hard at work demonstrating this is the landscape of the types of technical investments. This is a very busy slide. I don't expect you to be able to read all of this, but it does show a sampling everything from addressing osteoarthritis to surgery for cancers, which I will dig into a little bit later, whole eye transplantation, looking at investing in underfunded areas in women's health. These are the catalytic seeds that we hope to plant. If you think back to that first DARPA slide that I started, which one of these are going to emerge as those next moonshots that we've really changed the landscape? We won't know that in the next couple of weeks or months or years, even. It might be decades until we understand our impact. But these are the seeds that we've planted since we started that agency. All of that is available on our website. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Melissa.
So thank you, Renee, for that introduction to the model. I want everybody to remember that the chat is welcome to ask your questions or to put comments in the chat. Our team, Danielle Leach here, is monitoring the chat and collecting information from there. There's also a Q&A function that you can use. So actually, we would like to hear from you now all in that chat function. So please use the chat to answer this question. So how might we at ARPA-H provide better resources and tools to communicate more about the ARPA-H model? And I'll pause for a few minutes while people respond. So thank you everybody from your input. We have a few interesting ideas coming in. And so one of those is to make sure that we hold some regular meetings. We can also have hold some office hours to enable people to receive more of this information. And finally, people are mentioning that they would love to have easier access to the program managers. So thank you, everyone. So let's move on. We're all here to talk about cancer and the cancer moonshot. So as you know, when we hear the term cancer moonshot, it really does inspire all of us to really think big. And so Renee, what does that mean for ARPA-H? And how does ARPA-H really advance the goals of the cancer moonshot? And then also, can you talk a little more about ARPA-H's efforts and its current investments in cancer and how they were initiated?
Absolutely. Thanks, Melissa. I want to spend more time reading all the feedback in the chat, but I'm excited if we have time at the end, and I know that we can follow up after this, but thank you for the engagement. It's really exciting to see the feedback. So with regard to Cancer Moonshot and ARPA-H, as I mentioned earlier, we were sort of announced at the same time that the president reignited Cancer Moonshot during his presidency. And so this has been really exciting for us because that means that we were immediately on the radar of a lot of some of the world's best and even new and emergent cancer investigators. And so what's important to know about ARPA-H is we are not a top-down organization. Our ideas are very bottoms up, either from the program managers that I mentioned, or from all of you who send your ideas to us through those open solicitations. The way that we've set those up, we want to lower the barrier to entry. They're just 3-pagers that you can come and kind of throw your idea over the fence for us to react to. We really want to hear from everybody, and so that was our goal. And having those open solicitations, some of those cancer ideas that we received are really coming from the community that we can approach in an agnostic way, meaning that we don't have a predetermined focus on one of the objectives on Moonshot, but we want to make it as ARPA as possible. And so solving those problems outlined in Cancer Moonshot that really can't be solved elsewhere is the scope of ARPA-H in part, and creating that new infrastructure capabilities for those platform technologies applicable to cancer. So I mentioned the Health Science Futures Office. What is a platform that could be used for cancer, but could also be used for other diseases? By having platforms that can address multiple diseases, we give it a better chance of being financially sustainable in the ecosystem. We often are asking, what is the business model here? And so that would be another path. Creating innovative strategies to engage with patients. So this is one way, but we do build that into our customer experience of all of those efforts through those Heilmeier questions that I mentioned. And then engaging with our cancer stakeholders. In the case of our PSI program that I'll speak about in a little bit, it's also surgeons, for example, as a specialist community that we need to engage with. And then of course, coordinating across our federal partnerships to ensure deduplication, but bring in that subject matter expertise. On our next slide, some of the little bit maybe a deeper level down of how we're addressing that is the program manager directed efforts. Some PMs are developing concepts around programs. So getting on their radar, having conversations with program managers is a great way to learn about what we're doing, but also keeping an eye on our website and our biweekly Vitals newsletter, so you can know what are some of the solicitations coming out that you can participate in. And then program managers can solve these prioritized problems that are in Moonshot. And so every time that we start to pursue a cancer-related effort that is very ARPA, that we're going to de-risk the technology, we do map that directly back to those objectives to understand where we fit in the ecosystem. And then when we talk about infrastructure, what I don't mean, we do not have bricks and mortar infrastructure, but we're trying to think about what are some of the clinical trial infrastructure, what's some of the digital infrastructure that we can create that is long lasting, well beyond the end of any one given program, that we might be able to support the agency. Our ongoing engagement, Melissa is our Cancer Moonshot champion. She is a central belly button in the agency for all of the efforts happening in cancer. So if you have a question about the space, please do reach out to Melissa. But she is really deeply engaged across not only the government partners, but the not-for-profit sector and other organizations that exist in this domain. And then finally, we want to keep hearing from you. So please do continue to submit your ideas. I'll talk about a few of those that were projects that we received externally that we went ahead and funded. And so rather than just talking in abstract, so let me go to the next slide and give you a few examples of programs that we're actually working on in this area. And so these are, every effort I'm about to talk about here has a primary indication and a primary goal of addressing challenges in cancer. All of these align to Cancer Moonshot. So one is the ADAPT program. We talk about these what if questions. So the ADAPT program asks the question, what if we could adapt cancer treatments and tumors as tumors mutate and change? And so really innovating around adaptive clinical trials, using some of the new AI, ML technology and systems biology to bring better standard of care in real time to patients. Dr. Andrea Bild is a program manager for this effort. We launched it in March of this year. We're in the process of receiving applications here and reviewing those proposals. So we should be able to announce what some of those teams are. spikes. This was an application that we received from the outside world and was picked up by Dr. Ross Urek, and asked the question, what if programmable bacteria could be directed to kill cancer inside the body? So using entirely new defense mechanisms beyond what our own bodies encode. CODA is what if a single system could detect a broad range of cancer at the earliest stage of formation. So unlike some of the circulating tumor cell tests that you probably have heard about, this is really focused on using synthetic biology as a way to amplify what might be nascent signal in this space moving forward, and demonstrating some of those proofs of concept across multiple cancers. Sai asks, what if surgeries fix problems flawlessly the first time? So reimagining the operating room, investments in imaging technologies, augmented visualization, and even audio cues, as well as looking forward to robotics that might be assistive to make sure that we can also not only create this next generation of surgical suites, but make sure that we can do this in a rural setting. When I talk about that customer experience, we want to make sure we are making this accessible, not that you only need to be focused in a cancer center of excellence, which are very important places, but what about rural settings that might not have access to this type of care? And then last but not least, I'll go to these last ones pretty quickly. Thor is, what if we could boost therapy response rates to peritoneal or solid tumor malignancies? And this is really having a bioelectronic device implanted adjacent to that tumor that's being treated to understand it's not just the same dose every time. We might need to tailor that dose depending on what's happening with that cancer, and really trying to meet the pace and then outpace those cancers in a new way. And then the AB MRI program is the next generation tools to speed the use of health research data. And that's actually Ilana Hanku is a person that's running that. So really specific investments looking to advance the state of the art in cancer, which is a mix of programs, but also projects that were submitted from the external partners like those on this call. And the next slide. And now we want to talk about platforms. So I mentioned ARPA-H really loves to invest in platforms that can be used for multiple diseases to give it a really different life on the back end of that program, and a chance for that financial sustainability that they might not otherwise be able to achieve. So our Paradigm program tries to really, rethink the way that we can deliver hospital level care to every rural county in America. This program has proposals that are in and is being reviewed. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slides, but what does that vehicle of the future look like? Curate is looking at mRNA technology. We know those advances that many of us have boosters, of course, in our arms from mRNA, but how do we reprogram those tools to actually help tune the immune system? Here we have this platform that's looking at not only autoimmune disorders like lupus, but also cancers that may benefit from this type of immune system tuning. Embody is a program looking at if our immune system can manufacture cures to demonstrated diseases. So think cell therapies that we make in a bioreactor in a factory right now. What if we could boost our own cells to make turn themselves into therapies? And so really changing the paradigm on that manufacturing and production. And then last but not least, CT Neuro is thinking about brain sensing therapeutic cells, which maybe we could target a glioblastoma in one case, but we might be looking at other, for example, neurodegenerative disorders that could be bridged through a platform like this. And then we don't want to, on the next slide, forget about our small businesses. So we do have a really, I'm excited about our SBIR program in particular. And these are some of the awards to Opto Surgical and also Trace Biosciences that are looking at different aspects of robotics and nerve imaging that, of course, are broadly applicable to a number of surgeries, but also very relevant to cancer. What I want to highlight about this program is everything that we launch at ARPA-H, we think about a new business process of how we can make things simpler. And our team that Melissa's a part of looked at the requirements for an SBIR award, and we took the standard SBIR application and decreased it by 75%. We determined the final 25%, the minimum viable application that we know small businesses have 2 or 3 people sometimes, and it's really hard to write these grants. You almost need a PhD in grant writing. And so how do we make it simpler? And that's really what we're trying to achieve. With each program behind the scenes is a new innovation in the way that we do business that really our authorities uniquely allow us to do. Melissa, how am I doing on time in terms of digging into some of these efforts that I've mentioned already?
Let's see, it is 12:30. We might, since you mentioned these already, I wonder if we've just pulled out 4 of those programs.
Okay,
So maybe
perfect.
we'll flip through them kind of quickly.
Okay, so on the ADAPT program, which is that vision for an adaptive clinical trial that matches the pace and then outpaces tumors moving forward. The technology focus areas you should know about here. TA1, technical area 1, focuses on therapy recommendation techniques, including that multimodal data fusion, resistant trait modeling, and development of biomarkers to predict drug response. And so we're trying to get ahead. What will this patient react to, and how can we get them on the best standard of care? The TA2 focuses on the trial itself and how do we really establish a multiple therapy trial for patients. And then last but not least, really bridging the gap between researchers and clinicians. We heard a lot of feedback. I know our program manager, Andrea Bild, who brought this together, where research can be siloed from the clinic. And so what are we doing and innovating to help bridge that gap? And really that visibility of real-time data is critically important. The next program, looking at those precision surgical interventions. So cancer surgeries are really one and done. We really want to reduce the risk for resurgery after an intervention. And we'll do this through the devices, the dyes, and the algorithms that we use at the bedside or directly there in surgery. But in vivo, importantly, we don't want to rely on external pathology resources. And to be able to see those tumor margins as we go forward. On the next slide, looking at mapping the cancer and organ degradome atlas. This is that SynBio baseline approach. This has been awarded Georgia Tech, I believe, is the prime in this case, to look at multiple cancers and not only be able to identify cancer, but through some of that synthetic signaling, also link to where that cancer may be in the body. And so how do you use another biofluid to be able to detect that as part of that screening and detection? And then last but not least, that Paradigm program is really trying to rethink. This was actually launched by an emergency room doctor who during the pandemic spent his work in I think it was an Airstream that had been retrofit basically to deliver care. And I think he had the thought, we've got to be able to do better than this. So what does that mobile vehicle that delivers hospital level care look like in the future, where we might even be able to provide ruggedized and miniaturized CT scanning. So think of all the imaging deserts that we have around the nation that we might be able to address with the new platform of the future. Important to this, I also want to highlight AI intelligent tax guidance. And so this is really helping maybe a less trained worker that might be in a rural setting to be able to be guided through a variety of tasks and their interactions with the patients, so that those patients, again, don't need to be transported to a hospital center. And so with that deeper dive, I'll hand it back over to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Renee. And I just want to comment, we've had a few comments in the chat, and I wanted to just clarify one thing. I think we've gotten some feedback that these programs are already completed. And I just want to mention the agency is only 2 years old. So some of those projects that you have seen that have come from our open calls from the outside, those were just awarded last September. So our first awards were made last September. So they're only starting to execute on those programs and provide results. And then all of the cancer-related programs that we call new starts that are from the program managers, they were launched, meaning they made it through Renee's approval, and we put out a solicitation for them. All of them right now are in the stages of reviewing proposals and selecting who they want to perform on the program. So some of those will be awarded, we hope soon, and then they will run from 3 to 5 years and start executing on those programs and producing results.
Thanks for that, Melissa. I'll just maybe add one more point. So you're right. Most of these projects, if they have been awarded, they're only been for 3 or 4 months doing the work. So we haven't solved anything yet, but we're moving really quickly towards that. And there'll be most of those programs I announced. Well, this fall we'll be announcing who was funded, who applied, and then who was funded, of course. Really importantly, I encourage this group to keep an eye on our website. where we announce who our new program managers are, so you can see their backgrounds and see the areas that they're excited about. So if you're interested in sort of like what's around the corner, grabbing a new program manager and bending their ear on the issues that are really important to you is such a critical part of being at an ARPA. And even those existing program managers bending their ear and say, hey, I think, maybe you should think about approaching it in a different way. And I highlight this because that flywheel, our program managers have to start a new program every year. And so when I was a program manager in my past life at DARPA, I only knew my first program when I started, but I started multiple programs, and I was inspired by conversations with the community, with other funders to seek new paths for the next program. So it really is an interactive process, and engagements like this are our first way to get to that.
And so I'll pull on that thread and talking more about engagements. And I would like to discuss more on how ARPA-H brings in the perspectives of different people, patients, and other stakeholders within the health ecosystem. So I'd love to bring everybody listening in again for another chat question. So please use the chat to share some words you think of when you hear the words engagement when it comes from a federal agency, and to also share an example of an engagement strategy that you have found to be impactful that potentially we could adopt at ARPA-H. So we'll pause to get some feedback. So we have a few words that we've shared. I find these very interesting. So transparency, full of potential and frustrations. And a few more, opportunity and long. So let's move on. So as we continue to gather those answers, as you know, this community, the cancer community, is active and engaged on many fronts. Can you talk to us, Renee, about how we engage with different stakeholders in the community at ARPA-H?
Yep, absolutely. So I think we go to the next slide. This is just sort of high level, but we can walk through some of these examples. And so one of the things that we launched when we first started ARPA-H is ARPANET-H. And so this is our health innovation network that we really launched in response to initially a statute required by Congress that we had to be in 3 geographic sites. And so this was a requirement of the agency. And so we knew that we needed to have some presence in the Washington, D.C. region to be close to our payers, our regulators, but we wanted to make sure that we aligned the rest of our sites to be help deliver on that mission to engage our customers, but also the investor community that are going to be important to be the next investor after we've made those investments. So where DARPA has the Department of Defense to help them be an advanced developer of those technologies, that's not HHS in our part. A lot of that is the private sector. So ARPANET-H, we'll talk about in the next slides, greater detail how that's intended to bring us closer to our community customers and downstream investors. Infrastructure and program development. And so what we mean by this is, again, not bricks and mortar infrastructure. We're really talking more about how do we create long-lasting capability, whether it's a data infrastructure, the way that we're collecting information that is useful for the communities. And each one of our programs, you'll see in those solicitations how we sculpt that and bring that together. And then our commitment, of course, to improvement. So this is part of it. We have both positive and negative feedback in the chat. We take both sides of that very seriously, that we'll be reactive and responsive to this to make sure that we are being as clear and transparent in our work going forward. And then the technical assistant for PMs for patient engagement. And so Melissa and her team through ARPANET-H and other resources really help bridge that gap between patients and program managers. I did want to address one thing that did come up in the chat about how do I get access to program managers? And so we have 20 program managers now. It's a limited number of folks. You already outnumber them by quite a bit, even on just this webinar. But we've really taken our open solicitations and made that bridge to engagement try to be as low as possible, a 3-pager. And that is a good way to kind of throw your idea across the line and say, hey, would you like to have a conversation, program manager? It's one very formal way you can do it. The other that I really want to emphasize is proposers days. If there is a topic that a new program that's launched that you're very excited about, coming to the proposers days, you will be able to have a one-on-one in-person interaction with that program manager to soundboard your ideas and learn a little bit more about them. And so I can't emphasize enough how important those proposers days are. And then I know if you're a part of ARPANET-H, we do often have office hours and other learnings that are available. And so a little bit more on ARPANET-H on the next slide. This is our hub and spoke innovation network. And what we have been using, our customer experience hub and our investor catalyst hub quite a bit, is to do network surveys. This allows us to sort of spitball ideas, sometimes put it out to the community and say, you know, who are the players on a given topic area that we should be engaging with, but also what are the areas that need to be really ripe for development. Sometimes we even have a pre-solicitation that we will release for feedback. So if we solicit this as a funding idea community, what are we missing? We want to know that before we launch programs. We really want, it's so important for us at ARPA-H that we are not redundant with the rest of the federal ecosystem and the private sector. Those R&D opportunities, we will work with our program managers, as I mentioned earlier, where PATIO and ARPANET-H help support them to make sure that they are bringing in the best proposers, but also that in some cases we may be able to even do things like negotiate better contracts with advanced manufacturers that are part of our network if we have 3 or 4 teams that are interested in using some of those same resources. And then we have really made an effort. I tell all of our program managers, you're at your best if you're not sitting behind your computer, but you're out there and you're meeting patients, you're meeting people who are funding in the ecosystem. And last year, I think we've at least probably went to 20 or 30 cities last year to meet with different parts of the ecosystem to just learn more about it. And so if you'd like us to come visit you, we'd love to hear from you, as well as we plan these trips and our program managers go across the country in their next proposers days and ecosystem visits. And so what exactly is ARPANET-H made of? Well, right now we have 658 members. To apply, I think we'll show a QR code at the end of the presentation here, but you can also look at our website. It's not a pay-to-play model. It really is open for businesses, for not-for-profits, for institutions of higher education to be a part of this network and engage in those network surveys and the analyses that we do, from research orgs here to health orgs, manufacturers, incubators, and VC and investment firms. All of these are resources, importantly, not only to our program managers, but to our performers themselves as we launch these efforts. And so our CX hub is actually based out of Dallas, Texas, bringing in not only all of Texas, but all of the United States. But we do have physical offices in Dallas, and our IC hub is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On the next slide, so your feedback in action. And so based on your feedback, I did mention that we take it really seriously. We have done some spoke networking and facilitated virtual forums. And the CX hub, there's spoke signals and spotlights. In our IC hub, it's called Spokes. We also have ARPA-H Vitals newsletter, a bi-weekly newsletter. If you haven't signed up for it, that's a great way to stay involved and know what new programs we're announcing. And then visibility, we share events with fellow spokes. And so the members of this network can really highlight their own events and amplify each other's. Again, we want this to be a resource, not just for ARPA-H, but for the entire ecosystem. And then with our networking, connecting with fellow spokes. We actually had a recent Spoke Easy event where we brought together some of our spokes to just meet and greet and understand who else is in the ecosystem. Underlying that is great opportunities to team. So, we have member spokes that are community healthcare centers all the way to, robotics manufacturers. And so bridging the gap there is where we're seeing some really interesting magic. And then, of course, our program manager session. So hopefully you can make it to proposers days, but if you can't, we do also highlight the launches of our new programs with our PMs, so you can hear from them directly, but also have a bit of an AMA session with them. Back over to you, Melissa.
Well, thanks, Renee. Thanks for highlighting ARPANET-H. I want to do a quick poll, and that is, I think it's going to be posted on this screen. So let us know if you are currently a spoke in ARPANET-H. I think we can take down the poll, and are we able to share results on the screen? Awesome. Oh, so great. So 32% of you are currently members of the ARPANET-H. Um, it seems like a substantial number of you are not. So we do encourage you it should be a very easy application to apply either to our Investor Catalyst Hub network or to our CX network, and we can provide those contacts afterwards. Thanks. And Renee, so you did just highlight ARPANET-H and some ways that our communities engaged with each other through that network. Can you mention some other ways communities can prepare to collaborate with and do business with ARPANET-H?
Yeah, so this is really just a smattering of ideas, although I'll leave this to a lot of you, but you know, we should share the links at the end of this. I think in 2 slides, we'll have, I see a lot of people are asking for the links for ARPANET-H, so we will be sharing those in just a moment, I believe. But what we've seen some groups do a little bit of strategic planning. So a strategy session on the ARPA model with researchers and scientific leadership at your organization. So this can be facilitated by the hub. And okay, we'll advance to this slide too. So doing business with ARPA-H. Some of the ways that we can then engage is becoming familiar with our challenges and opportunities. These are the different levers that we have as an agency. So those innovative solutions openings, you'll see that each of our mission offices that we mentioned has their own ISO. And so, for example, the Health Science Futures Office will highlight the different types of investments that they'd like to make going forward. But it really is open to your ideas. It's a little bit just guiding. And then we have the program-specific ISOs. And so these are programs like Paradigm and SCI will then actually give you very bright line boundary conditions of what types of applications that they're looking for, and what is the scope of the problem that they're solving, and you all bring the solutions. ARPANET-H, you heard a lot about. This is our health innovation network, but it's actually also a mechanism for contracting. And so ARPANET-H is under the other transactions. And so what we can do is actually, if we want to fund a team to support ARPA-H through this mechanism, it's relatively easy for us to do. And one great example for those of you that are tracking our Sprint for Women's Health, that is all administered through our Investor Catalyst Hub by VentureWell in Cambridge. And an idea of what we heard from, we really wanted to engage small businesses here. And what we heard from them was it's so hard to write an application. And so we're really used to pitching VC. How can we make it look more like VC? And we did just that. It's, again, our business experiment for the Sprint for Women's Health. It was a 3-page application followed by a 30-minute in-person pitch. And we'll be announcing those awards. And so what a different way of doing business with the government, using the authorities that we have here at ARPA-H to try to catalyze that ecosystem. And so with that, Melissa, I'm happy to hand it back over to you for the last questions.
I'm sorry, it's been like total user error on switching the slides, so apologies for that. We rushed through. So as Renee mentioned earlier, a great way to find out information about ARPA-H in general is our biweekly newsletter called Vitals. So we have another poll that we'll put up quickly, and that's just, do you currently receive our Vitals newsletter? Okay, and the second poll question is, how did you hear about today's webinar? And we'll take a pause there. This information will be very useful to us as well. And again, we encourage you to sign up for the newsletter and to the Investor Catalyst Hub or the CX Hub for our network. I think we've been getting a lot of questions in the chat. And so we'd like to try to address a few of them right now. I know we're running a little bit short on time, but Renee, may I ask you some questions that we've received from the chat?
Yes, I'll ask the team while you're asking questions, Melissa. Maybe one of the other hosts on our side can post the links to ARPANET. I see we don't have that QR code here, and it seems like there's been a lot of interest here. So, but over to you for the questions.
So how do you make sure that ARPA-H invests where there can be the most impact?
So it's a great question, and this is one of the challenges that we give to each of our program managers. And so we do 2 things. So first, their program manager has their big vision and their idea. And so we've kicked the tires on that a lot. It can be uncomfortable to be a program manager because what we try to do is we try to almost break their model before we even allow them to go out of the agency with it. So what are we missing is something that we ask all the time. And so we look across the entire ecosystem. What is NIH funding? What are other parts of the ecosystem funding? Making sure that we're not redundant. We talk to those subject matter experts to say, if you had the authorities and leverage that ARPA-H has, what do you wish you could do that can change the future 10, 15 years from now? What is that future that you want to live in? And then we use our resources across our Investor Catalyst Hub to really dig deep into some of the venture resources to help look at what might not even exist as a market today, but that if we were able to develop a proof of concept, that we might be able to create new markets in these spaces. And so it is a very comprehensive look across the ecosystem that we do behind any one of these projects that we launch to make that really uniquely ARPA-H. Every time asking, is this addressing our mission to accelerate better health outcomes for everyone?
Thank you. Next question is, are there any resources for small businesses who are new to government funding or other people who aren't used to doing business for the government that we have available at ARPA-H?
Melissa, you're probably well positioned to answer that as well. A lot of that does come from our PATIO team, and the fact that we have a whole team dedicated to helping commercialize and translate the innovations from ARPA-H to be a huge signal to the teams. I'll give one example for the Sprint for Women's Health, and I'll actually hand it back to you, Melissa, if you want to highlight other resources that PATIO has. But in the Sprint for Women's Health, we have early stage proofs of concept efforts, and then we have later stage efforts that we will award called Launchpad, where we actually see there's just a few steps to like high risk steps to get this out into the ecosystem. Each one of those teams, we actually partner them with an expert in residence. And that XIR, who comes from the venture community, will help those teams, those small businesses, with whatever they need on a bespoke basis, whether it is they need to hire their C-suite, or maybe they need to do another fundraise, or maybe they need to figure out how to negotiate with a manufacturer to get their prototype made. All of those things would be in scope for an XIR, and they really are a business partner. Government historically does really bad at assigning those management team members as XIRs if they come from within government. So instead, we really rely on the private sector as a partner with ARPA-H to help us transition those out of ARPA-H. And in that way, we're sort of all speaking the language by the end of the of a program. But I turn it to you, Melissa, if there's anything else you'd like to highlight about the great work that PATIO does every day for our performers.
Yeah, I will mention a couple things. And Renee, you mentioned the small business application before and how we cut it down to make it much more easier for businesses, again, who aren't used to doing this whole application or aren't necessarily used to going to SAM.gov. We also, through our Investor Catalyst Network, just had a webinar on how to engage with ARPA-H. We do have an open solicitation in SBIR. And then overall, in sort of all of our programs, we really wanted to make it easier both on proposers and on ARPA-H itself, so we can move really quickly. And so most of our programs, including the Sprint for Women's Health that Renee just mentioned, they have a very short, we were calling it a solution summary. So just a 3-page initial proposal that the program managers can then review. And then they ask for, in the Sprint for Women's Health case, we did a pitch, a live pitch event. But for the innovative solutions openings and the other New Start programs, people will be asked then to submit a full proposal. So it's a much easier sort of application process than you may be used to through a typical, say, NIH grant application. But then, as Renee mentioned, also, we do provide a number of resources. Again, I would encourage you to join the ARPANET-H because there's a lot of resources in there for small businesses and opportunities to interact with other members of the ecosystem. And it's also a great way to get advice. So I'll move to a next question, which is really just a mention, but Renee, would love if you could provide context on this. So the timelines that people are seeing are very short, from the announcement of a program to when the proposal is due. How is that? I mean, I think there's some sense that that might be limiting innovation.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, by statute, yep, I'm off mute. So by statute, our program managers are term limited to 3 years. And so we really do bring that sense of urgency all the way down to the development of our programs. And so part of outreach like this to get the community used to the pace of which we launch projects is really critically important, coming to those proposers day to accelerate that team formation. But it's true, even 9 months might sound like a long time, but from going from that initial idea to getting it out in the real world, it's a very fast clip. So being engaged, having those conversations with the PMs once they launch that program is really, really important. I want to flag for I'm seeing some of the questions in the Q&A that might be a little bit confusing from the outside, but and understanding the pacing of how we're launching things, even inside the agency. Last year, we launched with a full suite of program managers, our Resilient Systems Office and our Health Science Futures Office. New this year, our Scalable Solutions and Proactive Health. We are just hiring our first program managers in those areas, but those ISOs are open and really will help us kickstart. So don't fret if you don't see a program manager listed on the site. Our whole team of program managers is helping launch the agency across those offices. There's also a question if about whether or not we're interested in cancer prevention. I'd say, I'd ask the question a little differently. We, again, don't highlight from the top down, these are the areas that we will fund. Instead, we find program managers who are a champion in those areas, for example, cancer prevention, or we signal through our offices. And Proactive Health is another office that we are just starting this year. So if you are interested in cancer prevention, we would love for you to send us your program manager applicants. If you really are looking for that person to really kickstart a whole area of that science for us, right here in the middle of the slide is a way to send folks a link of how to become a program manager here and bring those ideas to life.
And unfortunately, I think we are running close to time. Does any, yeah, so we're going to ask one more question, but does somebody, anybody here have the links to the Investor Catalyst Hub?
We already shared.
Yes, okay, shared. And then also, did you share my email and your email in the chat? Okay, so one last question, and I think, Renee, you already asked the one I was going to ask next. But here is a final question. So how can ARPA-H accelerate innovations that might be already out in the world with some funding, but there's some other barriers that are needed to be overcome?
Yeah, so typically with other barriers, there may be a technical component, and that's where we are primarily focused. Maybe it's a manufacturing component, but sometimes that can be a regulatory challenge or a payer challenge. And so we launch programs, for example, like Heroes, that try to really change the incentive structure of how we pay for innovation in the health ecosystem. And so these are very much in scope for us for conversations. I do want to just keep in mind that an application that comes to ARPA-H really should be focused on R&D and de-risking R&D. In parallel, we can de-risk a regulatory or a payer challenge. Very often we get applications for, hey, will you fund my phase 2 clinical trial or my phase 3 clinical trial? Those trials may be very well designed and established, but by the time they've gotten to that stage, they've been technically primarily de-risked. And so those would be out of scope for us. And so when we think about those more mature stage, we try to think like, what is that convincing scale, that last piece that ARPA-H can help address and get that across the finish line, and doing that in deep partnership with FDA. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our authority with FDA to reimburse FDA for services rendered to help ARPA-H innovation make it out into the ecosystem. Thanks, Melissa.
So thank you, everybody. It was so exciting that so many of you were on the call. Thank you so much, Renee, for starting this conversation. We look forward to many more interactions with this community, and you've made a number of suggestions that I hope we can adapt here at ARPA-H to interact with you more and engage with you on an ongoing basis. Again, we encourage you to sign up for our Vitals newsletter, to submit ideas for projects and program manage, or to become a program manager, attend proposers days, meet other people in the network, and again, feel free to, if you want to contact anybody at ARPA-H related to cancer, my email and Danielle Leach's email are in the chat, and we're a good place to start for contact within ARPA-H. So thanks again, everybody. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.